Now, first of all, why do you have this stuff? What do you do with this stuff?
Well, this is how I make a living.
But, I mean,
I just wanted to be introduced as a composer and to start to point out how hard it was for women to be taken seriously as creators of music.
This is the story of women who hear music in their heads, of radical sounds. This is the story of dreams enabled by technology.
Using all of these, we can build up any sound we can possibly imagine.
In electronics, you're dealing in energy.
Technology is a tremendous liberator. It blows up power structures.
We shall not be robbed any longer!
You could make something with electronics and you can present music directly to your audience. Somehow women get forgotten from the history.
The history of women has been a story of silence, of breaking through the silence, with beautiful noise.
It is with gratitude and humility that we acknowledge that at EMPAC we are learning, speaking, and gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Mohican people, who are the indigenous peoples of this land. Despite tremendous hardship in being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge Munsee community. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors past and present, and we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. I'm Vic Brooks, and I'm Senior Curator of Time-Based Visual Art here at EMPAC. I'm a white woman with red shoulder-length hair and dark-rimmed glasses, and I'm wearing a gray shirt, and I'm sitting here in my white-walled office at EMPAC in front of a set of gray bookshelves. We are really thrilled to have you all here today with us for a conversation with director Lisa Rovner and producer Werner Hed of Sisters with Transistors. This event is a collaboration between EMPAC and the iEAR Presents series, which is curated by my incredible colleagues, Professors Kathy High and Brandon Miller, who I will pass over to in just a moment, but we'll actually just start with a few words about Lisa and Marcus to begin. So Lisa's based in London, where she is zooming to us from, actually, I'm not sure if Lisa is in London right now, but she's definitely in the UK.
Close enough.
Great. So Lisa's short films, music videos, and exhibitions have been extensively presented in both art institutions and theaters all over the world. And she's collaborated with artists such as Pierre Huyghe and Liam Gillick throughout her career. But Sisters with Transistors marks her first feature documentary. And for me, it really exemplifies her meticulous approach to in-depth archival research, the exploration of sound, and her long-standing commitment to the articulation of overlooked histories via a cinematic lens. Marcus, welcome. Marcus is the co-producer of Sisters, and he's also the founder of production companies Punderson Gardens in London and Willow Glen Films here in New York State. And he's recently actually co-written and directed Like Me with Dan Fox, which you should also check out. It's the first film on the history of Coombe transmissions and throbbing gristle, and it was made in collaboration with Genesis Biorage and Cosi Fanni Tutti. And it's a very interesting accompaniment, obviously, to Sisters with Transistors, not only in its sort of music pioneer focus, but also in its heavily archival approach. Marcus is currently working on a new fiction feature called Primera Esteba el Mar, which is an adaptation of a Thomas Gonzalez novel from the it's set in the 1970s in Colombia, and it will actually be filmed there this fall. So thank you very much to both of you. Thanks for everyone for joining us today. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Branda.
Hi, I'm Branda Miller. I'm a professor of media arts at RPI. And I've been in the arts department since the beginning of the MFA program, which started in 1991. But when I came to RPI, I had already heard the kind of legend of these pioneering women who really represented the arts and creative spirit of a technological university. And from there, planted the seed that became the arts department in EMPAC today. So it's with my greatest honor that we welcome all of you, all the way from those who've connected personally to these pioneering women, to the generations after them who've been inspired by their musical healing and meditation, to the students. I know I have at least 2 classes that are here right now. I think you're really in for a treat. You are opening up to an experimental, extraordinary universe that makes incredible sense at RPI. Their vision, which actually was at the core social practice, as well as experimentation with technology, has grown in ways that really fulfill a level of art practice that no one else could do. Very much the power of women in a field that was very much a male field. They are our visionaries and leading us into a musical, magical universe of sound. And so it's with great honor that I want to thank EMPAC. We love collaborating with you. iEAR Presents, which has gone on for actually about 40 years and comes really out of this early experimentation of the 60s. The School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, New York State Council on the Arts, the Rensselaer Union, who sponsored the film license for the RPI community. And we also want to give special thanks to the film's distributor, Jordan Matos at Aspect Ratio, and to George Schmaltz at Metrograph. Metrograph is premiering this film in the United States on April 23rd. So this is a special treat for us. And we thank George for kindly giving us special permission to screen ahead of the premiere. And with that, I will pass it on to my amazing colleague and the head of the arts department, Professor Kathy High.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you, Vic and Lisa and Marcus for being here. And all of you, I think there are people from very far flung around the world here today. So thank you for all being here. It's really an honor. And it's an honor, as Brian has said, to show this film. So one of the things we're going to do shortly is to show a clip from the film. And 2 of the people who are highlighted in the film, along with many other amazing women composers and electronic musicians. 2 of them include Pauline Oliveros and Maryanne Amacher. And so we'll be showing clips about their sort of excerpting their sections. But I'd love to speak a little bit just about the history of Pauline Oliveros and her relationship with RPI, because we had a very special bunch of years with Pauline. She was a professor of practice here in our arts department for 15 years. She joined the department in 2001, the same year I was hired, and was, as I said, here until 2016, when she sadly passed away. She was such an avant-garde pioneering thinker, maker, and teacher that it was really inspiring to have her as part of our department. Always fun too. She taught classes around deep listening, which you'll hear about this practice in the film, but she would put together ensembles where all the students could join in, such as tintinnabulate. And she also had this amazing ability to put together these telepresent performances that was way ahead of this Zoom moment that we've all been in this past year. So she really was a pioneer in technology and in thinking always ahead of the curve of what we could do and will be doing. She was hired by Neil Rolnick, who was the then chair of our department, and she would do these teleperformances with places like Stanford and Mills and all around the country. So one of the other things she did was to practice this deep listening, which was her great belief and maybe one of her greatest gifts to all of us. In 2015, just about a year before she passed away, we were lucky enough to inherit the Center for Deep Listening here at RPI, and that was a real gift to us. And Tomie Han was the first director of this center, and now Stephanie, because Tomie retired, congratulations, Tomie. Stephanie Lovelace is now the director of the Center for Deep Listening, which still is a very vibrant center. And we thank Mary Simone, Dean Mary Simone, from our School of Haas, Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, for making this happen. So Paul, one of the things that Pauline did also was to work and do residencies and perform at EMPAC from even before EMPAC had its own building. And one of the great events that I remember that Pauline was part of was the Wow and Flutter series of concerts, 2-day days of concerts in 2004 that Johannes Goebbels was the one who curated. And it was a reunion of the San Francisco Tape Music Center that I will never forget Pauline playing her accordion to a fish tank that was where she was determining her notes, according to where the fish were swimming. It was an amazing moment. So Pauline always said that deep listening was her life practice. And I absolutely believe in that, and you can feel it. And you'll learn about this in the film if you're not familiar with her practice to date. So I would love to also address Marianne Amacher, but I don't know her history as much as the amazing director of EMPAC, Johannes Goebbels. So I'd love to call on you, Johannes, to speak about Marianne Amacher's residency and participation in EMPAC in the past. Thank you all. I'll pass it to Johannes.
So I'm obviously, as you can see, an old guy, and I actually had a personal relationship to Pauline in 1976, which is a long time ago. And I was at the Computer Music Conference in San Diego with a group from Stanford, and I visited this beautiful, beautiful house on the beach, on the ocean. And I was so jealous, and I thought, this is how I want to live. Then I was able to invite her in 1985, actually, to a university in Germany for a 10-day improvisation workshop with students. And then I lost track of her until I came to interview for my current job. And all of a sudden, she was sitting there. And I was saying, Pauline, I thought you got lost in upstate New York. And there she was. So, and as Kathy said, we did the Wow and Flutter Festival with a beautiful book, which you can read about the San Francisco Tape Music Center, and all the events will be online. Oh, before I forget it, Lisa and Marcus, I was able and privileged to see the whole film, and I was so enthusiastic about learning about my own past. So I really enjoyed it. And so Pauline worked with us for all the years she was here. In 2012, we put on a concert, which you can watch online fully with the San Francisco, with a good, what was it? The Ion, what's the name of the band? The good, anyhow, Pauline at 80, great event at EMPAC, listen to it. Now, Marianne Amacher. So Marianne actually came to us in 2008 under the curation of Micah Silver, who was at the point in time the music curator. She worked here for 2 years on a piece, which was incredible because she placed loudspeakers all around the theater. She came for extended residencies, moved the sounds through the whole space and outside of the theater. And then she passed away before she could do the performance. And so Micah Silver and Sergei Cherepnin performed her piece, and we dedicated a special space at EMPAC to Marianne. It's called the Star Room. And this concert actually will be online as well, so you can listen to this last piece, which she was not able to finish. And these over 2 years that she worked on the piece was a very close relationship with us in getting her music to be done and at the same time supporting her livelihood so she could continue to do the work. Thank you.
Can I just, thank you, Johannes. Can I just jump in and also thank Ione, who is here. Ione was Pauline's partner and spouse for many, many decades before her passing, and still is, and was her great collaborator as well. Ione is an artist, incredible writer and spiritual teacher. She's the head of the Ministry of Mott, but also worked deeply with Pauline Oliveros to create these incredible experimental operas that they are continuing today. So thank you for joining us, Ione. And I'll pass it back to Vic, I think, right?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for these incredible introductions. So, Lisa, if we could start with you, if you, just a few minutes on the background of what drew you to this material, and that would be amazing. Thank you.
Sure. So first off, thank you so much for having us, and for all of you for joining on this this talk. So I am. I think the thing that really drew me to the story, obviously the sounds, the images that I first discovered of these women, you know, this alternative history of electronic music, I first discovered just through a kind of website. But I think the thing that really drew me in was when I discovered that this was really the story of liberation, and that these sounds were sounds of liberation. And then, of course, I think as a filmmaker, when I was watching the archive, and it just felt so alive, and I just really felt like I could get a real sense of the subject of these women. And yeah, I was completely mesmerized by the subjects, and yeah, just wanted desperately to share that enthusiasm. I was completely inspired by not only their sounds, but also the way they talked about music, the way they talked about sound, the way they talked about listening. There's just so many different elements that really drew me to the subject. But yeah, as a first feature-length documentary, I couldn't have chosen a more rich and nourishing subject. And then just a little bit about my background. I studied political science, so I've always kind of been interested in, as you said in the introduction, in storytelling and the politics behind that, the consequences of, you know, the stories that were told and the stories that were not told, and I guess confronting dominant narratives with counter narratives, confronting history with a capital H with her story. So those are the things that I've always kind of been drawn to. And again, this subject just kind of clicks all of the things that I'm interested in. And after my studies in political science, I then started working in the art world. So I worked both in galleries and then with artists, and then kind of discovered my voice as a filmmaker, really while I was working in a video store. So that's kind of where I got my education on film.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Lisa. Looking forward to delving a little deeper into all of that. And Marcus, the same for you. I mean, of course, you're in more of a support role than some of your films here, and a great advocate for women filmmakers. If you can talk a little bit about your involvement in the film and the background to it.
Yeah, I mean, it was Lisa who came to me with the idea when I, at the time, was running a production company in London, and we'd made ourselves semi-famous for making artist films and films that were really difficult to fund and still trying to get them done. And this was another one of these projects which was so amazing. You just could not say no. It's like it had to be made, this film. And my job here, as you say, is more of an advocate and support. So it was sort of, you know, how can we get this made? Looking at it, we obviously started it in the UK. I nowadays live in the US and I run my company from here. But we built the film on a European structure. So we sort of looked at how could we find little pockets of money here and there, and what can you do to make this film actually come to life? And making a film like this is never easy. You're never going to have enough money. And we know that very well after several years of doing this. But you kind of have to tug your way along, but you have to set it up correctly from the beginning. So I think what Lisa was asking for was me coming in to just help building this kind of structure, as well as along the way finding, you know, different kind of solutions for where can we find an additional piece of funding, or how do we go about this etc. And you know, it's been a long journey, and we've had a lot of grief and a lot of joyous moments. We have had 3 fantastic editors. We have had months in the edit suite. We have had a lot of archive research, and Lisa has been on this as a full-time job for, you know, beyond what most of us ever would do. But that's kind of filmmaking. And as you say, you know, a little bit more about me, I see filmmaking as it's a collaborative effort. We're all filmmakers. I normally direct mostly, but I also run a production company. I do now as well. And you know, it's collaboratively, we're trying to get the films made, whether you're directing or producing. To me, it's sort of the most important thing is to get great films made. And in this case, we've succeeded, I think. So I think that's sort of where I'll hand it back to Lisa again.
Thank you, Marcus and Lisa. And if you have anything else to add to that, otherwise we could go into the first clip and then just like start getting deeper into the content of the works. Okay.
Pauline was on stage with an accordion. The room was exploding with sound. It was ear splitting. I had never experienced that kind of volume before.
I can't remember when I wasn't interested in sounds. I remember particularly things like riding in the car with my parents, for instance, maybe in the back seat, listening to the sound of the motor and listening to the sound of my parents' voices being modulated by the motor. Listening to my father tune his shortwave radio, listening to the whistles and pops and static. I mean, I was always fascinated with the in-between sounds in the stations, just tuning in between. I love that. I credit my mother. For my birthday, she sent me a tape recorder, and that was a very significant event because nobody had tape recorders, you know. It was in the 50s. I began to do field recording from my apartment window. And then in 1959, got started making a tape piece called Time Perspectives.
I had installed a microphone in 8 locations at the Boston Harbor in the New England Fish Exchange, connected to telephone links. It was very nice to come in late at night at 1 o'clock in the morning and just turn on the mixer and have the sound coming from the distant night when I liked it best because I could hear patterns and various shapes. I realized, there's a tone of this place. There's a whole undercurrent that exists here that makes this recognizable in some way. It wasn't hard to analyze it. In Boston, it was like a low F sharp. In other places, for example, New York, it was like a low E. It wasn't that I wanted the sounds of birds or the sounds of the harbor or any of these sounds. I really wanted to experience and learn about hearing.
When people say to you, yeah, but is it music? After you say, yes, it is, how do you expand on that?
Well, I think that's sort of an old question. Much of our music, classical pop, has this beat, has this gallop, has this trot. I'm interested in music that communicates some ideas.
So maybe I'll just hand straight over to Branda or Kathy to kick off the questions.
You know, there's so much in here that's so incredible about that section that we just watched. I mean, the whole film is amazing, I must say, but and this kind of collecting of these stories. The thing that I really love in the last 2 sections with Pauline and Maryanne Amacher is this the sense of their work, as Amacher said, like allowing the listener to contribute to the music. And this seems to be a theme in many of the artists who you've interviewed. But I wonder if you how you kind of began to draw this out of the material that you're working with, because you're dealing with such an amazing wealth of archival material. And you made those points really beautifully, Lisa and Marcus. I mean, they were really wonderful. So that sense of music with an idea that Amacher speaks of also is really present with both of their projects and both of their life's projects in terms of how they were involved in kind of politics around, and also storytelling and so many different things, physics, energy. Such a lot to deal with in such a short time, Lisa. My compliments to you. And how did you begin to bring some of this stuff forward from this massive archival material that you had?
Well, to be honest, a lot of it wasn't that massive in terms of, I mean, obviously, I've kind of shaped it in a way, but for example, I didn't find that many interviews of Marianne, for example. So a lot of the ideas, I'm so happy and grateful for what we did find of her talking, but I guess it was more kind of doing a lot of research and really figuring out what is the essence of their work, what are the stories that are really key to bring out, and then how do we illustrate them, both sonically and visually. But yeah, again, I think perhaps with Pauline, there's, her life, there's so much there and so many different, periods. And I know that it's going to be frustrating for some people to see the film and say, oh, why didn't you talk about this? Or why didn't you go more into that? And it's true, like we only have a little bit of time. So it was a struggle to figure out what is it that we really want to bring out in this very short period of time. But I think that those two sections, just rewatching them now, it was pretty obvious that those were to me, the things that spoke to me the most in terms of as you mentioned, this, both the politics behind it, but also just this, I think I hadn't really thought about listening in that way before discovering their work. So that was like something that just completely changed my life. I mean, I really feel now that I listen differently. I listen more actively, more inclusively, and I guess in terms of like, how do you tell these stories? I think what's super important, and what I hope that people feel, is that, each section really has its own identity, because it's, first off, it's a different voice, it's a different character, but also just even in the way that it's edited, some sections are more dynamic, some sections are slower, some sections are more poetic, more abstract. But yeah, it was a process, like making this film. It was just so long because it, not only telling one person's story, that's already difficult, but then to try to tell so many stories and make sure that you give them the time, the space, for people to really get a sense of who they are and what they were about.
And then added to that, Lisa, I would say, there's sort of the time span where you're dealing with in this film. It's, it's not normally a film spans, a few years, or maybe, as you say, a career of one person. You're talking about a time span of almost 80, 90 years here. And in the edits, there was a lot of editing and a lot of chipping away, which has led to this. But there's a huge condensation of both time and people, which is very nicely balanced, I would say.
But I think the discovery of that interview of Pauline's was so, it was amazing. It's an interview that's housed at Yale, and then of course the footage of her, the Super 8 footage, which is kind of more filmed from the perspective of a friend or of a partner. That just gives this real richness. And Kathy, I know I saw you here. I think Kathy, her archive, her footage of Marianne as well, where she's with these leather gloves performing. I mean, it's just so amazing that these things exist. So it's very difficult to make a film when you don't have that, when you don't have material to, when with Bebe Barron, for example, that the section, which we won't talk about so much here, but it was a real struggle. I had like one photograph to work with. So, telling that story. But yeah, luckily with these two stories, or these two lives, yeah, we had really rich material to work with.
I'll follow up on that with one question. Thank you. Yeah, I also I feel like the piece that we watched almost was like a meditation for us as a viewer. It was not just a story of other artists, right? It pulled us in. And Pauline's quote about that her music is about relations and interactions and social and political, and that she hopes that the energy that comes out is beneficial. And I'm wondering, it feels like you so articulated that structurally, but as documentary filmmakers, how did you take these stories of these women who are so incredibly important and yet, you know, still in many ways marginalized, and center them? And how did those decision-making processes for you decide on what was in the film and what was left out?
So I think one of the key things for me was that I wanted them to tell their own stories. So the thing that was super important to find was, you know, their voices talking about their practice. I think a lot of when I watch documentaries, a lot of time I really struggle with this this format that we've kind of become used to with a documentary, whereas you have other people telling the story and how great these people are. And I don't think you really need that. I think if you just let them speak, then you don't need to say this person is important or this person is great, because actually it's just so obvious when you actually hear them speak. But I think in terms of the filmmaking, what was really important to me is just to allow women to have the space to speak. And then of course, for the viewer to have the time to listen. You know, this is another thing that I struggle with documentaries, is like you always have people talking over the goddamn music, and it's a whole film about music. And you have like 5 seconds of the music, and then it goes again to, so those were two things that I was reacting against. And then in terms of the form, I thought this is such a radical subject. Like, these women were doing things in their own way. They were breaking so many boundaries and grounds. So I really wanted the filmmaking to reflect that. And so it's a bit of a, obviously there have been other all archive documentaries. I'm not the first one. I'm not pretending to be that, but I definitely wanted the filmmaking really to reflect the subject. And I really spent a lot of time, and it was a struggle. Like, funnily enough, the Pauline section was one of the first sections we kind of nailed. It was very easy somehow. Like, it just all kind of fit into place, and we have this amazing archive. And I had just a few interviews that really just, where it was all said. And yeah, I want to thank Ione as well, because a lot of, finding that some of the archive was so difficult to find. And then sometimes, like with the Pauline stuff, Ione and Daniel, another filmmaker who's been working on a documentary about, the generosity of sharing, sources, et cetera, made that section really sing.
Yeah, thank you. Should we go to some questions in the chat, Vic?
So Mary Coyne, I'd love to hear about finding and restoring this archival film footage, if most of it was from Pauline's archive.
So as I mentioned, like, really lucky to have, first off, Pauline was great at archiving. So, she recognized early on that if she didn't do it, nobody would. And so this is a very crucial thing in storytelling in general, and like the importance of, if you are an artist, like, please archive your work, because, not someone might not. The problem also with archive, though, and with Pauline's, this is a good example, is it's kind of spread out. So it's not all in one place. And I understand why, she had all these different associations. So it's good to have a bit of her in all these different places where she was, but it makes the process of the filmmaker more tricky. In terms of digitizing, the Super 8 stuff was digitized, so that was great. Some of the other footage in the film we did digitize, which is so exciting, because you have this tape and you don't know what's on it, and then you discover it, and it's just, really an incredible moment in your filmmaking practice. But yeah, obviously a lot of these interviews were done kind of like, the quality was really low, so we worked a lot in the sound mix to make sure that, take away whatever we could, and to help with clarity. Does that answer?
Yeah, I think that answers beautifully. Actually, just to follow on from that, I also had a question. I mean, you've kind of touched on this a little bit before, in terms of like that, it's amazing that you're able to also just like go around and collect all these archival materials, and it also just points to how important archives are.
Yeah.
And it also just points back a little to a question for me, which is around, you know, it's predominantly white women that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And of course, like, you know, if you're talking about like the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, for example, or Daphne Oram, you know, it was so hard for a white woman to be given that kind of access in a way, but it would have been even, I mean, so much more difficult had it been a woman of color. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit to kind of like, you know, how you reckoned with that in terms of the process of making a film.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that we talked about from the beginning. You know, obviously we wanted to include as many silenced women as possible. And it's something, yeah, it's a tricky, it's a sad one, but I want to make a point here because this is very important. This film is not the comprehensive history of women working in electronic music. This is a story. This is a story that is limited by the fact that we had very little resources. So this is something that really came from like a passion project. I didn't have unlimited resources. I didn't have a PhD behind me. I didn't have, you know, introductions from, this material was difficult to find. Like, let's just be honest, like this is not, obviously, you know, even the stuff at the BBC, like that was difficult to get access to, like you have to pay. It's not just, you know, so your point about this being a very white story is problematic, in the sense that like we wish it was a different story. You know, I think everybody here would like to see it be, that, I guess what I'm trying to say is just because it's not in the film doesn't mean that there weren't women of color making electronic music. So that's really important. And I think this is just the beginning, hopefully, of an unearthing of many people, women, you know, all kinds of people that just because of our limited storytelling ways of telling stories, we've kind of left a lot of people out because we're obsessed with, you know, this idea of this genius, you know, the sole male white genius. And I think that now we're starting to kind of break open and start to tell stories differently and from different sources. And so, yeah, does that?
Yeah, that's totally, yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's also why the archive is just so crucially important here. You know, you can still find these materials, you know, in people's attics and people's, you know, you can kind of like piece together new stories actually that have yet to have been told.
Yeah, and just to one last point, obviously, this film is very much like the Western world. This film is based on the languages that I speak, French, English. So there, you know, there's quite a well-known Danish composer who was working post-World War II, Else Marie Pad. I didn't have a translator. I didn't have the funding to get stuff translated. So it's we have to remember that we're kind of limited in the stories we tell also by our like basic things like what languages do we speak? I'm sure that you know, that perhaps there were women, I've heard perhaps there's a woman in Japan, but again, like how am I supposed to, you know, so yeah.
Also, Lisa, one limiting factor that we have had from the beginning and that we, you know, wasn't just a struggle, it was also sometimes a helping in the sort of, that took part of the shape is how the funding comes together. Because when you apply for funding for these things, they have to be country specific. You have to be focused on a particular thing. We got a bit of money out of the B5, which is the British Film Institute, that meant that X amount of percentage of the film has to be British women. So when you're doing a film like this, it's really important to know, where does the film belong? Is it the country you live in, or is it the country of the composer, or is it, you know, and also that determines very much how you can make the film. Because we have another producer on the project called Anna-Lena, and she's from France. So that helped in that we had, you know, also a French voice. So these things also shapes a movie. This is the battle of making the movie, is trying to fit all of your ideas through the bureaucracy of money and through the amount of archive, you know, and also people who weren't archived, and there is no visual material for that, had to, as you say, with Else Marie Pad, you know, these things, if there wasn't any visual material, we had to take the route of, okay, here is something where it was actually filmed. We can actually show something rather than just a still. And there's all these things shaping it up basically, and the finances is sadly part of it.
Yeah, I think that the finances and also just like the logistics of filmmaking is so crucial to kind of like hear you talking about this in order to also sort of break down kind of like the lenses through which we're seeing things. So thank you both so much for that. But I'll just go back over to the chat because they're coming thick and fast. So Audrey says she's very excited to see the film. Can't wait to see what you've got with Eliane Radigue. My question is, now later in life, as her current and past work has seen a resurgence in touring and performance, does she know how beloved she is?
Eliane Radigue, yeah. Yeah, I think, I think that it's, I mean, how beloved, I'm not sure, but I definitely think that she is more aware of her importance and, just the number of people who want to collaborate and who want to talk to her and who are writing about her and the performances and the grants and all that stuff. So yes, but I think, yeah, it's quite an inspiring story to think that, even after all those years of hardship, that it can kind of turn around and it can, it can end in this great way. So yeah, I would say that I think that she is, yeah, I think that she is conscious of how much the world has loves her.
Okay, so Bibiana asks, how long did the editing process take?
So the thing about this film is, like Marcus was saying, like we got a bit of money and then we went out and I did a bunch of interviews. We got a bit of access to some archives, we digitized some things, and then we would go into the edit for a little while, like a month, and then we'd have to stop because we didn't have any more money, and then we'd have to find more money. And then of course, by the time we found more money, then that editor was booked on another job. And so that's the problem with making documentaries. And oh well, I'm not free for another 3 months, and then you wait, and then oh well, actually, so anyways, it's kind of difficult to know how long in fact it took because it was so spread out. But I have to say, in a way I'm really happy that it was such a drawn out long process, and I'm really happy that I wasn't able, I mean, happy is the wrong word, but I feel now with perspective how great it is to have been able to work with different editors, because each of them brought such a unique talent and a unique perspective. And I really feel like it made the film better. But in terms of number of weeks, I don't really know. I think it's kind of gotten all blurred. And then at the end there, it was just even more, and it just kept going on and on and on. And I mean, it's funny just rewatching it now, I still feel like, oh, there's just these little tweaks that, you could go on forever basically, but it's good as well just to have deadlines. And, the reason we stopped really, or the reason we got it done, is because we had a festival that we wanted to apply to. And that's really good for getting the film done, forcing yourself to finish.
That's the last bit of money for editing, and then that's where it has to stop at some point. But to answer to that question, I mean, it took about 2.5, 3 years with spread out pockets of editing from the beginning to the end. The first cut, as Lisa said, you went out and did a lot of interviews. We shot everything on camera, etc. When we done the first cut, I think that's when you, Lisa, decided that, no, I'm not going to show anyone on camera. I'm just going to keep it to archive, which scared the bejesus out of me and the other producer, because it meant that it's going to be more difficult to sell. But I also thought this is going to be beautiful and amazing and fantastic that you're going to do this. So it was pockets of editing. And as Lisa says, that's beneficial. I've done quite a few more feature-length docs, and the benefit of stopping the edit and waiting for 6 months for whatever reason, I've had many different reasons, both good and bad, for why those things happen. And it's really good to get away from something for a while and then come back, because when you come back, you have a much clearer mind about it, etc. Editing, if you keep doing it, it can sound incredibly glorious. You spend a year in the edit suite, but actually you're just going to get lost in the process if you're sitting there for a year. It's good to do 3 months and then stop for a bit, and then come back to it. So if there's anyone, asking these questions based on that they want to make a film like this, etc., is plan for that, allow yourself to take that kind of time, because it's really good to have that. And also that it's good time for you to do other things. That's when we went back and did research. That's when we found other little bit of extra money. That's when we kind of worked out what the story should be and talked to writers and and so on, and did a bit of clearances on media we wanted to use and so on. So it's good to not just put one editing thing period in at the back end of the film and think that's going to be done at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think originally we had thought, oh, we'll get some money from the BBC, which is, you know, like the equivalent of PBS in the States and here in British Broadcasting Corporation. And we'll, you know, I thought, oh, of course, everyone's going to want to buy, you know, to commission this, which is a very different process, because in that situation, you just get a chunk of money and then you have to make the film. But the fact that we didn't get the commission meant that we had loads more time to find the missing gaps, to fill the gaps, to find the material. I mean, some of the material literally came in like the last moment. So it was more difficult, especially like the financially, and it still is, but it definitely was great, especially as a first-time filmmaker, to have the freedom and the support of supportive producers to just, you know, make something that really reflected what I wanted, rather than what a TV commissioner would want.
Yeah. Also, to that point, it's also helpful if you're producing a film like this that you do give yourself time, because certain grants and certain funds, etc., won't be even available as you start. You know, certain grants and funds have a stipulation that 50% of the film has to be made or funded, etc. So as you start a film like this, or you do a film like this, keeping those things in mind and thinking of, well, when we get to this point, that can be your deadlines along the way, is when we get to this point of the first rough cut, that's when we can actually apply for these funds. And then you have to wait until that comes in, and generally comes in as a no. So then you have to wait even longer. But it's sort of, that's why filmmaking becomes a long, slow process if you don't, because hardly any of us, if we're doing this kind of film, start out with a big chunk of money in the bank and then we just go. It's always going along the way and finding different routes to get to the finishing point, and allowing yourself that time and not feeling stressed out about it. But which it is along the way, it is stressful.
Yeah.
Now we're here.
Thank you so much. Okay, Kate asks, I think maybe you've answered this a little bit already, but are there any composers that you discovered in your research that you needed to leave out of the documentary? Anyone who would be interesting for future projects?
Well, I mean, obviously, you know, we wanted to include more of Wendy Carlos, but she didn't want to be interviewed, and so I think it's a bit of a shame, but she's somebody who I really, really respect, and wanted for her to be more present in the film, but I also respected the fact that she didn't want to be. But yeah, I mean, more recently, I don't know, I guess maybe you guys are familiar with Paulina Anna Strum, who just recently passed away. Her story is fascinating as well. She's blind and she's an energy healer, and she makes this really just absolutely gorgeous music. So yeah, I discovered her maybe 3/4 into making the film, and it was just, yeah, where does she fit, and does her story stand out enough, and it's not that it's not a good story, her story is incredible, and I really urge you all to look her up. But yeah, so you kind of, yeah, you do have to make some decisions, and they're not always easy, and yeah.
Kathy, do you want to take some from the chat?
Sure. Yes, I'd love to. Thanks. So, and thanks. This is a great conversation, you all. I love it. KB Drake said that I enjoy how you created the actual sound environments that were so important to tether the work, the desert, the harbor. How did you create those sounds? Quote, sounds that happen without me, quote, for the film. They were very moving to KB.
So most of the sounds that you hear are music from the women themselves. So, you know, when you're in the Pauline section, you're hearing her music. When you're in the Marianne section, you're hearing her music or her compositions. And then very late in the game, we brought in a really brilliant sound engineer called Marta Saloni, who's never done sound design, but I met her through Suzanne Ciani, and I don't know, there's just something about her that I just immediately was drawn to. And she works a lot with, you know, musicians and bands to like as a sound engineer. And so, but then she also has her own practice, and she makes performances with tape, and she knew all about, you know, all the people in the film, and her process, the way she talked about sound, and we watched the film together, and she added all these small things, but in the most delicate way, never with ego, never with dominance, always just in a complementary way. And most of the sounds that she added were produced either inspired by or with respect, or actually with the same tools or machines that were used in the moment that she was adding stuff. And then a lot of reverb, like just to kind of give it space and dimension. And, you know, a lot of the archive, the sound was so flat, it sounded awful. So she really needed to like work that and like spatialize it, and she was really, really good in the sound. Obviously we had like a sound mixer and sound cleaner, and then she came in and she added these little things and just like kept putting up the reverb. Like it was, so yeah, it was fun. It was a fun thing. And it was just working with editors that are also very, just very good with sound.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I can imagine. I love that description you just gave of those clips being so flat. I want to go back to a comment that Sue Cook made earlier in the chat, which is, it feels so, it's not really a question, but just as an elder, I have to call out this one. It feels so good to see older women honored in this film in the UK. It is such a rare thing. So, I mean, I also have to echo that. And I think, you know, it's an amazing piece because of some of that too. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, what's not to love? I don't know what else to say. I mean, yeah, I guess I've maybe always been drawn to history in general. And yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why there aren't more things. Although I think that there is at the moment a real kind of renaissance. I think the Guerrilla Girls have this great statement about, like, you know, the advantages of being a woman artist. And one of them, you know, it's all jokey and stuff. And one of them is like, oh yeah, you don't have to, it's just about how, you know, women don't get recognized when they're young. It's only when they're older that people start to love them and things like that. So I think it's a bit of a shame, but I think it's also, I'm glad that it, yeah. Didn't finish my sentence there, sorry.
It's okay. We'll all fill in the blank. Spencer asks, can you name drop any of these women of color? I guess who you were sort of alluding to earlier.
In terms of pioneers, no. That's why they're not in there. I mean, I don't know if you guys obviously maybe know more than I do. I'm not a musicologist. This is the other thing. I'm also relying very much on, you know, who I was talking to and things like that. But Pamela Z, yes, heard about her for sure. She's still going.
So yeah, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Pamela Z and Mia Masoka, who did talks last week with our music curator Leila Hua, which were incredible, and they're both working with EMPAC on new commissions now. And so they're a little slightly younger, you know, but like still pioneers.
Thank you for adding this. This is so great. Yes, many younger women of color, absolutely. I really love More Mother. I don't know if you guys are familiar with her, but I really love what she's up to.
We're getting some great names in the chat now.
So. Okay, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is kind of what I'm hoping for, is that this, again, you know, like I said, like this is all about inspiring curiosity. This is not, I'm not a historian, I'm not a musicologist, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm super happy. Okay, more names. This is so fucking great.
Yeah. But this was also a conversation through the making of the film, is that this has to be an introduction. You know, we have to, at least if we can break this little wall and get the film out there and get people talking, and then there was talks about follow-ups and ideas about, do you do another one, Lisa, and so on. This is a start of that conversation on a filmmaking level, I think.
Yeah, and I'm just reading Ion's chat here. They are younger, but there may be some we have not yet located who are elders. Absolutely. This is what I was saying earlier. Like, we can only make a film when we know, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's absolutely crucial that we keep looking and we keep opening up the story to fit more voices as we find them. This is not the definitive. This is a history, not the history.
And that's really an interesting way to look at documentary form, and the kind of open-ended form that you created honoring these women, is that it's actually beckoning us to keep telling that story by the very construction. Can we switch? There's one question in here that would be a shift from the documentary construction and structure to a question about dovetailing into the ever-growing climate change awareness that was in here. And a lot of the women artists who were inspired by these amazing pioneers who are working now in sound refer to themselves as environmental artists, right? They're thinking about ecology, and really, when you think about it, the performative quality of these brilliant visionaries really was dealing with environmental sound. Could you talk about that, the connection between their work and the ever-growing climate change awareness?
Yeah, well, actually, I should say, when somebody was asking about somebody else that I had researched that didn't make it in the film, Anea Lockwood is somebody that I met, that I spoke to, whose story is incredible as well. And for whatever reason, it's just difficult. But her recording of rivers is like, really springs to mind. And I think Laurie as well. I mean, Laurie Spiegel, I think that she was really, I think some people consider her to be an ecofeminist. Maggie Payne as well. There's a whole, I remember reading something about Maggie Payne and Laurie Spiegel being, ecofeminist. This is an old paper. But yeah, you're right. It's all about kind of being aware, right, of your surroundings, and listening not only to voices, but also to species and to beings and to your environment. So it's not something that I was really conscious of in making the film, but now that you mention it, I can definitely see the link there. And yeah, it's quite an interesting thing to think about. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, we could invite that to somebody in the audience who is inspired by Pauline and sees themselves as an ecofeminist doing sound art. I know you're on here. I see several of you. Anyone want to respond?
Yeah, I'm just seeing in the chat, sorry. But yeah, Maria Chavez, Borayun, Ruth Anderson, Leticia Tsunami, absolutely. I guess the other thing that was quite difficult is the word pioneer, because it implies in many people's mind the first. But one of the things that I realized in making this film is that, and that's something that, people are like, oh, the structure is a little bit loose and like the chronology is a little bit unclear. But the reality is that lots of people are doing this, kind of thinking about similar things or working with similar tools at the same time. And so maybe even just this idea of first is something that we really need to rethink and reconsider. And why do we put so much value on it? Anyways.
I wonder if we can call on either Sanam or Lisa.
Yeah, I mean, for me, deep listening has been a huge practice that I connect everything with. I mean, I connect my improvisation practice with, and I connect my teaching. My teaching is extremely, related, influenced by deep listening. I cannot talk about really about climate change, because climate change hasn't been coming up in my work, honestly. But definitely, deep listening has been coming up in my work, which is, I can frame it in a way that it is improvisatory. It is definitely related with feminist and queer methodologies, and also basically queer bio art based by Karen Barad and other people. So And I connect deep listening with all those practices in some ways.
Yeah. In my work, I focus on listening to insects and other invertebrates, and I make music, percussion, and electronic music composition. And it's really connected to climate change through looking at habitat loss and species decline, and like ongoing insect collapse, and also through just like our human relations to insects. And this idea of shifting our relationships with insects through listening, through what can be called a deep listening practice in different ways. But yeah.
There's that really great cricket chorus, Slow Down. Do you know that work? I forget the name of the composer.
Yeah, I've heard that. And then
it's so beautiful. I really recommend it. It's amazing.
Another work that I've gotten really excited about recently is something that Pauline did with in a trio, and it's the Cicada Dream Band, and they had like a live group of cicadas performing with them in concert, and it's so cool. And I'm actually about to like start this summer. I want to like do some deep studying of deep listening, deep studying of Pauline's work, in particular her this use of a tape delay system as a filter for the music, but like expanding that into these ideas of environments and insects. Yeah.
Super.
I also like the idea of using deep listening with human and non-human creatures. You know, the creatures that we might call objects. So I like the idea of like actually having a connection with materiality through deep listening. One thing that I do in my last pieces, I use vibrators as my collaborators, and I basically improvise with them and their sound, and that has been a really fun adventure to actually apply deep listening into these kind of non-human and human collaborations in some ways.
Nice. I've improvised with ants in my work and other insects. Not live on the spot, but by recording them and then playing theater along with them.
Thanks so much for sharing. I think there was one other person, Jennifer, that also just wanted to speak about their own work in relation to this. Jennifer?
It's such an honor to be here and to listen and to just be with everyone that's on the same wavelength right now, whether they're here physically or going to tune in later. I had the pleasure of speaking with Ione over the summer, actually. I remember interviewing her and just connecting with her about a piece I wrote for Opera Wire. Since then, really went into a deeper collaboration with myself based on self-awareness through the healing powers of frequencies. I just developed a program called Soul Vocal Frequency Integration, which allows self-transformation in collaboration with transformation of the planet. So I truly believe that healing frequencies are here, and it's just merely us tuning in to allow for these frequencies to integrate, activate, and affirm the healing that is now. And it's just such an honor to be here. This makes me so excited. Thank you.
Thank you. Sounds fascinating. Can you write it in the chat, what you created?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for just sharing a little more about what you're saying, about what Pauline said about the quantum listening effect.
Oh, yes. Well, she's written about this. I encourage all to, she's given and many interviews as well. The quantum effect is recognizing that it is not only that we are listening, but the sounds that are coming to us are in response to our listening. And so the environment is listening to us as well. So this is a very powerful understanding of listening. Enjoy that. I enjoy it very much.
Wow.
Yeah. And so in a way, the sounds that come to us are what Arnold Mindell would call quantum flirts. the environment is flirting with us.
Yes.
So that also involves other aspects of what is coming to us, but sound in particular. Pauline was very, very clear and very excited about that. Yeah, she would be so delighted and happy about this and this film, and I know that she's listening, listening through dimensions. If anybody could do it, it's Pauline.
I believe that.
Also through technology, she has communicated with many through the ethers technologically. So that's a lot of fun. That's another film.
Wow.
So you can read more about, she has a paper on quantum listening, a short paper that's out there. You can find it.
Thank you so much. I just want to, I mean, I know that we're running out of time and we have to screen the film, but it just reminded me of one of the first, when I first moved to Troy to come to EMPAC from London, and I was feeling very at sea, I guess. And I sat down with Pauline in our cafe here in the building, and I was like, oh, you know, everything's so crazy, da, da, da. And she's like, well, I just got off. She used to teach her Mills course on Skype, as was mentioned before. And she was like, well, I was just doing, you know, a deep listening session. And so I closed my eyes, everyone closed their eyes. And then I didn't realize for 45 minutes that the Skype connection had gone out. So I was doing deep listening to a screen. And I was like, that's so Pauline. It's like the power of Pauline, just kind of, you know, Skype couldn't handle it. Anyway, small anecdote.
Yeah, there are a lot.
I feel like there's a lot in the chat now. I don't know if Branda or Kathy want to take over or if we're kind of coming to a close. I want to also just mention that for those of you that are not in the RPI's community, everyone at RPI can go into the media site and actually watch the film for the rest of the semester. For those of you that aren't, of course, it's going to be premiered at Metrograph virtually, I think virtually and maybe in person. I'm not sure where the New York State things are right now. So you can catch it then from April the 23rd.
This was so fun. Thank you so much. I'm like, I was a bit nervous, you know, when I heard 200 people, I was just, but this has been so lovely. So thank you very, very much.
Really, thank you everyone who tuned in. And I do hope you love the film when you watch it.
Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you, Lisa and Marcus, so very much. Thank you everyone for being here and with us and making this such a special session, and apologies for the technical issues. Kathy and Branda, maybe you have a few last words before we screen the film.
Just that this has been such a treat hearing both of you speak about this amazing piece that's so incredible, tracing all of this history. And thank you for all the work you've put into it. It's such a gift. And as you said, there'll be many more to come because of this one. So thank you for doing that. We loved having you here. And all of you, the whole audience, thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for sharing. And thank you, Pauline, for being here with us and being our guiding spirit as we move forward from this event into a space of sound and listening.
Thank you.